Hey everyone, welcome to A Plain Accounts podcast. I'm Alicia McClintic here with my co-host Ben Cremer, and we're going to take a look at the gospel lection today from the Gospel of Mark. We've been working through the Gospel of Mark substantially for most of this year, this lectionary year. We took a break for James a little bit ago in response to some of our listeners as they wanted to spend some time with their congregations moving through the epistle to James, and that was really fun. So we have brought that up a couple weeks in a row, mostly to say we really welcome your feedback. We value it and seek to respond to it as we want this to be a really helpful resource for pastors and preachers. We're looking ahead even to the fall and to Advent, to next liturgical year and what that might look like. So we really welcome your feedback. And if you're the kind of person who does preaching scheduling quite far in advance, like, we welcome any sort of feedback that can help us shape this to be a really helpful resource. So that's, a bit about us and where we're heading with a plain account. How are you this Monday morning, Ben?
Oh, man. So good. I'm just over a terrible flu and got my voice back just in time for Sunday. So feeling better and looking forward to a good week.
Good to hear. Shall we dive into the scripture?
Yeah, let's do it.
Great. We're in Mark chapter 10, verse 46. I'll be reading from the NIV today. Then they came to Jericho. As Jesus and his disciples, together with a large crowd, were leaving the city, a blind man, Bartimaeus, that is, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside begging. When he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to shout, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more, "Son of David, have mercy on me." Jesus stopped and said, "Call him." So they called to the blind man, "Cheer up, on your feet, he's calling you." Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet and came to Jesus. "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus asked him. The blind man said, "Rabbi, I want to see." "Go," said Jesus, "your faith has healed you." Immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the way. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God. Such a small passage, but packed with a lot.
Indeed. Where should we start?
Well, I think the lectionary organizes this well in that we have this exact same response from Jesus to the disciples last week. "What do you want me to do for you?" So I, not to jump ahead to homiletical handles too soon, but I think that at least for me, it's a good place to start with the contrast of these questions. How did the disciples respond to Jesus' statement, "What do you want me to do for you?" And even in light of the rich man asking for eternal life, this similar interaction there. So those things can be needed backdrops as we read this. But we see Jesus leaving Jericho and heading towards. Are we to read that he's heading towards Jerusalem at this point?
I mean, I think for the whole Gospel of Mark, we're meant to read that Jesus is marching toward Jerusalem.
Right.
I mean, maybe not geographically speaking, but at least like in terms of Jesus's mission and purpose. Like, we were told by chapter 3 that Jesus has religious and political enemies who are trying actively to kill him. And that Jesus is moving increasingly more and more to the center of that space, which is Jerusalem. And I think you and I were just talking about this, that the Gospel of Mark is maybe best understood like in reverse, kind of looking back. And so those of us who have maybe read the Gospel before, or know how the story ends, kind of see the cross as the guiding force of the whole gospel, that Jesus is moving intentionally, directly, and with significant like force and energy directly to Jerusalem, to the cross. And as we come to know Jesus as the Son of God as the one with power over the natural world, with power over forces of evil, speaking against the empire and the establishment, and speaking for the least and the last and the lowly. We know that Jesus is pushing toward that moment, the cross, which is the enthronement scene, so to speak, in the
Right.
gospel, where Jesus is made clear that the kingdom he has been talking about is a very different kind of kingdom, and that this is the place, the moment where he's revealed publicly as king. So I think when we take into account the whole arc of the gospel, I mean, from the beginning, we're meant to see Jesus like marching on the way toward Jerusalem, toward the cross.
Absolutely. That's at least I'm reminded of that as I'm reading through the Gospel of Mark, that this journey that he's heading towards, every event along the way is to be seen through not only the cross but the empty tomb at the end of the narrative, that so much of it is to be understood proleptically. Like, we're heading towards the empty tomb and the cross, but then everything that has happened beforehand needs to be understood through that as well. And I think that gives a bit more flesh of like the messianic secret that happens all throughout Mark as well. It's like maybe Jesus is encouraging them not to say anything because they don't have the appropriate foundation or perspective to see and truly understand until after the reality or the revelation of the resurrection.
Right. And I think this is maybe the lit nerd in me coming out, like my obsession with literary structure. But I think this story of Bartimaeus, healed and then called, could be either seen as a healing story or a calling story, like within the broader context of Mark. And we just talked about two other kind of calling stories, with the rich young ruler and James and John, who sort of approach Jesus to try to volunteer as tribute, like, hey, tell me what I need to do to belong to the kingdom, to inherit eternal life, or kind of asking for positions and power within this kingdom. And Jesus like offers an invitation to join him on the way to the cross, saying like, you don't know what you're asking.
Right.
Like the kingdom that I'm a part of has this demand toward self-sacrifice and all the other things that we understand the cross to be, like a symbol and invitation for. But then here, Bartimaeus responds really differently from those other two. And then even we could name other examples of calling stories in the gospel. But I think rather than putting this story with some of the ones that have come before, personally, I think it's best understood as as the first story of the passion narratives of the Jerusalem days. Yeah, what do you think about that? How does that change our understanding of this particular text, like these few verses? If it's less about the on the road ministry of Jesus and more about the like Jerusalem days, passion, crucifixion, resurrection narratives.
Well, I think just the sheer fact that his title for Jesus is the one of the most unique ones in the entire Gospel of Mark, calls him Son of David, and it's akin to the centurion after the death, him hanging on the cross calls him the Son of God. We only get these true, clear, and crisp pictures of who Jesus is from a blind beggar and the enemy, the Roman centurion. You know, these unclean figures who are supposedly on the outside of God's mission or covenant, according to the religious minds of the day. That they are on the outside of God's mission, and yet we see this inbreaking of God's love and mercy towards those even on the outside. And they are the ones who see this clearly. So I think, of course, it needs to be seen through the lens of the passion narrative, because it's only when we truly grasp the depth of the cross and the glory of the resurrection do we really understand who Jesus really is in light of these events.
Which then sheds some significant light on like what's happening in this interaction between Jesus and Bartimaeus. And as we seek to understand like what is happening in terms of discipleship here, like what's going on, what are some of the inner workings behind this faith that has healed Bartimaeus, and then the courage and energy and impetus that he has to just leave everything behind and follow along the way. It seems that he's got this clear-eyed vision that others haven't up until this point, and that he, I want to turn over some of the things that are happening inside the passage, and maybe it's best to kind of circle back to the beginning of the story of the passage. So we have Jesus walking along the way. I think we're meant to understand that he's moving with purpose toward Jerusalem, and along the way, as they're leaving the city, a blind beggar calls after him, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The crowd is super annoyed, says like, "Shut up and be quiet, like stop yelling, stop making a scene." And I wonder if maybe some of that is like political anxiety, or like ascribing this title to Jesus sort of brings unwanted attention. Yeah, or do we understand this as kind of like connected to the messianic secret motif? I don't know. What do you think about that?
No, I think that's an angle that I hadn't really even considered. I heard it as a statement of faith and more begrudgment from this crowd that's just so fickle. Because you see this transition, is like, "Be quiet, you," and then Jesus said, "Bring him here," and they're like, "Oh, take heart, he's called you." It's like, oh my gosh, are you going to turn on me like any moment now? And we don't get a change in title of the crowd from the crowd now to the crowd triumphal entry and the fiction. So it's like the crowd is always the scariest group in the Gospel of Mark, and so it's an interesting dynamic here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, they are a fickle character for sure. And then the blind man refuses to be dissuaded. He continues to say, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." Continues to cry out toward Jesus. And Jesus calls him over, says like, "Come, bring him to me." And then there's this question: "What do you want me to do for you?" And we've seen this question a couple of times, like just last week with James and John. And then I feel like this is kind of consistently the question that Jesus brings to those who come to petition him, where Jesus says, "What do you want me to do for you?" And I think there are some significant layers to that question. I think in light of, say, our understanding of the way Jesus approaches like the rich young ruler, or James and John, like the echoes I hear in this question is like, do you really want a different life? Like, do you really want to live in the kingdom that I'm talking about? Do you really want to leave the old ways behind, completely behind, and step into a new way? Yeah, and we've seen people respond differently to that question. Like James and John last week responded with this. They come to this conversation carrying the baggage of empire, so to speak, with the previous structure of power and authority, and like grant that we can have these positions. power, authority, military might, influence, whatever, fill in the blank. But they I think have this energy and passion about the kingdom that Jesus is talking about, but they're still like clouded in their vision and understanding. Like they just carry this baggage of the old way of thinking into the new space. And then we have the rich young ruler who we also see come with this like earnest desire to belong to the kingdom that Jesus is talking about, and recognizing that he lacks something, that there's something that the kingdom demands of him that he just doesn't quite know what it is. And Jesus, in love and compassion, says, here's what you need. Sell everything you have and give it to the poor and come follow me. But he leaves sad because he can't do it. He might say he wants to live in the new way, but he's unable to cut the ties that bind him, to disentangle from the economic system that's holding him captive, right? So he leaves Jesus sad, unable to do what Jesus asks, or rather what Jesus invites him to do.
Right.
But then here we have Bartimaeus, who responds differently. I feel like I've been talking a lot. What do you think?
No, that's all good stuff. So keep it up. I just keep thinking back to the seemingly contrast between those who request things from Jesus as if they just want to invite him along and affirm their way, the way that they're already going, than the act of faith of saying we want to wholly leave the way that we're abandon what we're doing and follow you on your way. We want you to be our way, Jesus. And this word for pistis, this Greek word pistis for faith, that's all throughout the Gospel of Mark, is I think best translated as faithing or believing. It's a very active, embodied reality of faith that you see. Is from the Syrophoenician woman, the woman with the issue of blood. Like you have that same statement said here that Jesus says to the woman with the issue of blood, that your faith, your pistuos, has made you whole. And I can't help but see even the narrative of the breadcrumbs that the Syrophoenician woman talks about here, because Bartimaeus is stuck in Jericho. He's a blind beggar. He's not going anywhere. And so all he's probably heard so far of Jesus is rumors.
Yeah.
And so we have no real evidence. As far as we know, he's never been to Jericho, right? So all he has is the breadcrumbs of this hearsay or these rumors of who Jesus might be. And yet his faith is whole, even based on those little tiny breadcrumbs of what he's gotten. And he cries out and refuses, with shameless audacity, refuses to quit until he is heard by the Son of David, by the Son of God. And so you see this dynamic of faith of saying, I want to even abandon my own way. And Bartimaeus just throws everything to the side, his mat, his cloak, everything to follow Jesus on his way. Even when Jesus says you may go on your way, he insists to go on Christ's way. So it's this constant contrast of, am I going to invite Jesus on my way as an addition, or am I going to follow Christ on his way?
Yeah, a tiny detail I read in a commentary, like as a blind beggar in the city of Jericho, apparently in Jericho, it doesn't get that cold, right? Like the only reason you have a cloak is like to sit on it so that people passing by can like set things on the cloak, so that when you're packing up your life at the end of the day, like you're the boundary of your world, if you're blind, is literally like the edges of that cloak, and like kind of what you've gathered for the day or what people have been generous enough to give to you are like it's there on the cloak, and he casts it aside. So I think I can't quite get away from that image of like leaving the whole world behind. The economic system, the sociocultural system, like the whole way that you have understood your existence in the world. You leave it behind and you say, like, none of my ways mean anything. The only way that matters is Christ's way. I mean, speaking about the way, that's how the first followers of Jesus like talked about who it was they were and what it was they were doing. Like they call this is before Christianity even had a name or a title, but they just said like we're followers on the way, we journey along the way. And I find that word really interesting, and I wonder if Mark uses it intentionally, sort of responding to that first kind of group of early believers, early followers, early practitioners of the faith, which reminds me of the continued refrain of the last will be first, right? Like the last, the least expected, the one on the outside is the first person we see to follow along the way.
Yeah.
Like clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose.
Yeah. New disciple. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I love too just one more contextual side note, at least for something that was new for me. I'd always understood the importance of sight, this theme of sight, all throughout Mark's gospel, but I was always confused by what I like to call the appearance of ints in Mark's gospel, where the first healing of a blind man, he saw figures as trees walking around. And it was blurry, wasn't really understood. And, I saw this clear representation of Bartimaeus' faith, and that he saw clearly when the disciples didn't. So I'd always compared him to the disciples, not seeing things clearly. But I'd never really compared those two stories together and said, well, upon the hearing of the gospel or seeing Jesus for the first time, we may only see like a dim reflection or not hear it clearly, and yet through authentic faith, through a humble desire for mercy and request for Jesus to come in completely and follow Christ on his way, then we see things crisp and clear, and we hear things. And that refrain, those who have eyes see, those who have ears hear, and that dynamic became really crisp for me on this reading through. And I think moving to some homiletical handles, that just leads me to the question. It's like all these things are so fascinating to me, and at least I come away with a richer understanding of the text. But I really want to make that real for my community, and I'm wondering how to really draw them into the breadth and depth of this jam-packed passage of, because Mark is pointing to so many things that he's already written about in this passage through these few verses. So what are your thoughts? I heard through the grapevine that you just preached this recently. So
by heard through the grapevine, you mean I told you 20 minutes ago?
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Oh yeah, that. Yeah, ahead of the lectionary again. Yeah, I think there are a couple of ways to make this concrete, and I think identifying with those blind folks in the story kind of helps us find ourselves caught up in the story that Mark is telling. I think all of us have something that holds us back from really approaching Jesus, to respond to that question, what do you want me to do for you? I think all of us have something that's like holding us back there, or all of us have this kind of cloudy vision, and purely by the grace of God, we have these moments where we can see really clearly. And I'm not sure if we as pastors and preachers have anything to do with creating that space for people to kind of move from cloudy vision to clear-eyed vision of Jesus. But I think we can invite people into that journey to say that we're, perhaps maybe another point of reference here is that we're all like that father who says, I believe, help my unbelief, right? We're like that we're all in that space of like longing to see Jesus clearly, and waiting for that moment where we no longer see trees walking around, but we see what's really happening. Yeah. Anyway, I suppose some of the homiletical handles for me there are like helping people find themselves in that journey of faith. To say that just because you don't have this like absolute clear-eyed, deep conviction about anything, like, doesn't mean that you don't belong on the way. That we're working it out together, and let's help each other name the things that hold us back from approaching Jesus with humility. Let's help each other kind of name what clouds our vision. Yeah, so I think that's one way to kind of enter into the text and to turn it over in your community. For me, I think I've talked a little bit about the church that I pastor and the ways that we are at a really like significant turning point in our life together. It's my first year pastoring with them. They're like a church that's been through a lot, and we're really trying to discern who is God calling us to be, who are we becoming, where are we going, and we don't want to go anywhere that Christ isn't leading us. We don't want to do things just because they've always been done. We don't want to come into the kingdom of God with like the baggage of the empire and the previous systems. Like we want to listen carefully and to look closely for what God is up to in our neighborhood. And we're praying for the courage to participate. So I took a really communal angle with this passage, to say to my people, like, as a community, as a church body, what do we want Jesus to do for us? What do all y'all want Jesus to do for all y'all? Like rather than this individualized discipleship, like, what does it mean for us as a community to pay attention to God's mission in the world, and to leave the old world behind and step into the new way.
I like that a lot. My mind always jumps to wondering how I can, what metaphors can work, what maybe sermon analogies can work, and stuff like that. And that's been tough for me to really think of any tangible ones. But the nitty gritty of stating, it's like, are we doing the hard work to see clearly? Are we faithing? Are we? Because I think it's so easy for us to trust and put our faith in other things, and really want Jesus to, even like if life were a TV show, we want to invite Jesus to play the main role, when, and that sounds right to us, but Jesus wants to be our script. He doesn't want to be the main character in our life. He wants to be our story. He wants to be our script. And I think so many times we just invite him kind of like a condiment and add him to the things that we're pursuing, rather than wholly leaving all of our definitions, our preconceptions of what this is, for all that Christ has to offer, in the way of the faith.
Yeah, and let's not kid ourselves. That's hard work. Like, there's a reason that like generations of faithful followers of Jesus talk about that as a death, as like a death to self and a death to the old way. Like, it's difficult,
It really is.
but it's absolutely necessary, and it's also not the end of the story, right? Like the death of the old way clears out space for the new birth and the new life and the resurrection that God is in the business of working.
Right. Well, that's great. Well, as always, this conversation has been so rich. I appreciate you giving us the insight of what you went through already with preaching this passage to your community, and I'm hoping the same. We are moving to a kind of a 5-year vision of what we'd like to see here in South Boise, to make an impact in our neighborhood and to be servants of our neighborhood rather than kind of the dynamic that we've sort of seen in the Treasure Valley of, we have found the answer. Let's help you to find it as well, right? So we want to move into more of the servanthood in our neighborhood, and so I think that will play well into seeing this vision clearly through the eyes of faith, rather than our preconceptions of what that might look like. So I think that might be the angle that I step through this coming week.
Wow, that's really great to hear. I'll be praying for you as you do that work with your
Appreciate
people.
that. Yeah, be praying for your community as well.
Thanks.
Well, any final word for us today?
Clear eyes, full hearts, can't lose.
Could we play the Clear Eyes commercial?
No.
No? Okay. Because I'm really tempted to do that.
I mean, may the consequences be on your own head.
Perfect. Like burning hot coals. Awesome. Well, thank you, Alicia, and thank you for all those who listen today. And please feel free to follow us and give us feedback on all those social media outlets. The podcast is available all week, and we do live sessions hopefully every Monday. We try to get Monday or Tuesday. Feel free to join us then and add comments. Join the conversation on the lectionary Facebook group as well as the website itself. And please, we thrive on your feedback and your comments, so please feel free to give those to us at any time.
Thanks, Ben.
Yeah, thank you, Alicia.